Now, the Chancellor has suggested that compensation paid out to those affected by the infected blood scandal could be very expensive for the government. Jeremy Hunt has been testifying to the inquiry, where he said the government has been moving fast enough to compensate people. It's estimated nearly 30,000 people in the UK were given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. We can speak now to Justine Gordon Smith. Her father died in 2018 after being infected with hepatitis C. Good morning, Justine.
Hi, good morning, Chloe.
Thank you for talking to us. First of all, just tell us a little bit about your dad.
He was a jazz musician. He was incredibly charming, very, very handsome, a bit of a rogue, ran jazz clubs and things like that. Very, very innovative, very strong trade unionist, brilliant dad. We loved him very, very much.
Now, tell us the circumstances surrounding him receiving infected blood.
Well, we don't know how he or when he became infected because they didn't tell him until after they used him in the clinical trial in 93. So they told him in 94 when he was already very, very ill. He'd just been given a really large inheritance from his grandfather, a great uncle, which was to help with his haemophilia, and he lost all of that because they didn't tell him about his health condition. So, and he had a very, very challenging life after that.
I know that you said that he really changed, didn't he, as a person? Just explain that to us.
Well, I mean, if you've been infected and you're not given the accurate information about it, I mean, they didn't really even give him, they didn't even really explain the implications of it to him. That they gave him a leaflet that said some people might get cancer, and it's actually a lot more than some. So he just became a recluse. He cut himself off from his children. He became harder to contact. He was very, very ashamed. He wouldn't have people around at his house, and I mean, one of the really saddest things was they threw a bit of money at him when he got cancer, and he said to me, and we did his house up for him, and he said to me, why is it that only now that when I'm dying that they help me, that I've got somewhere, that I feel proud of where I live, why is that? And I think that that's really poignant because the discussion about the interim payment is not it's not exactly to bereave parents and children. It's actually to acknowledge the death of your loved one and the life that they have lost and their losses,
It sounds like it must have been so difficult for you as a daughter who was clearly close to her dad to just watch this unfold before you.
Well, I didn't just watch it unfold before me because the government haven't provided any specialist palliative care for the victims. So essentially they get cancer, even though they've got really bad liver damage, and they just get sort of chucked out into community palliative care. And no disrespect to the staff working in community palliative care, they're all doing their best, but they don't understand about liver damage. So if you pump someone full of opiates that's got a damaged liver, they will go into the bloodstream and they will develop hepatic encephalopathy. So essentially my father tried to kill himself a couple of times, self-harmed. I've had to, find him almost dead. And then, see my dad be tortured to death by those drugs. So, it's a lot more complex because when you infect, because a lot of the blood products had more than one virus in them, and the people that are being killed or dying, they're dying not only just gruesome deaths, but really ghastly, just ghastly. It's kind of worse. It's the worst thing you've ever seen in your life,
And when you gave evidence at the infected blood inquiry, you heard the Chancellor give evidence as well. What do you make of the government's response, bearing in mind everything that you and your family have endured?
Well, I think that they're really, really misrepresenting the complexity of it. The inquiry showed quite clearly yesterday that they've given an interim payment to 4,900 estates, I think it is. 900 of those are bereaved partners. So they've already acknowledged the death They've already given a payment to the bereaved widows, which is an estate payment. It's not to the individual. So there are 2,000 estates left. So we're talking about £200 million, which would make the difference now to those families, to those parents and children that have lost their loved ones, that they could just give to them now. I mean, they give up so much in corporate welfare. I mean, I was just looking at the $4 billion that they've given to the banks, in reducing the rate. Why can't they just do something decent? I mean, I was at the inquiry and I saw mothers, who'd lost their child, who were living, in abject poverty. Why can't they just do that, Chloe? Why not?
Yeah, just make a huge difference to you and other families if they can press on with that compensation.
Well, I did the sums. I worked out, the interim compensation to 2,000 families. It's £200 million. I mean, what is that in a drop in the ocean to that government? Who've spent so much. I mean, you just think about the PPE scandal. It just doesn't make any sense to me why any compassionate person would leave people to suffer and not. And I mean, I didn't personally heckle Rishi Sunak because I'm quite a polite person, but I understood why they did.
Yeah, he was heckled earlier this week, wasn't he, at the inquiry? Justine, listen, thank you so much for speaking to us. It must be really difficult to talk about, so I am grateful to you for taking the time out to speak with us this morning.
Not at all, and thank you for covering it.
We will continue to do so. Thank you so much. That's Justine Gordon Smith. Her father died in 2018 after being infected with hepatitis C. And we've just heard so many stories, haven't we, over the last few days about how different families have been impacted, actually in very different ways, but all with the same outcome, that they feel abandoned, they feel that they want this compensation, and they feel that they're not being listened to. And we'll continue to cover that here on Times Radio Breakfast.